Progress. Okay, thanks, Sonia. All right, we'll admit everybody and close the waiting room. Hi, everyone. Welcome. So excited to see you all. Can I give folks a second so that they can sign in and we'll get started very soon? All right. So good to see everybody. All right, we're going to get started because we have a lot that we would like to cover with you and a lot to share today. So I'm really excited that you all are here. We'd love to do some introductions in the chat so you all can get to know each other throughout the session. So what we'll ask you to do in the chat is to share your name, your pronouns, an organization that you work for or work with, and where you are in the world. And I'll put those instructions in the chat. If you all don't mind sharing that, that would be great. And I will kick us off with some introductions while you all are putting introductions in the chat. So good to see some familiar faces and some members of the coalition here as well. So my name is Stacy Marie Garcia. My pronouns are she, her. And I work at the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience in our Methodology and Practice department. And I live in Santa Cruz, California, in the United States. And so great to see that we have participants from all around the world joining us today. I'm so excited today to share alongside some of our amazing community partners in this project and sites in this project the learnings thus far in the Addressing the Silences project. This is one of 3 webinars that we're going to share with you all to share what we're learning through this process alongside some of our member sites that are participating in it. And today's session is going to focus on reflecting on exclusions within your organization. For those of you who we haven't met yet, we're so glad that you're here. We are the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience, and we are a network of over 350 sites in more than 65 countries all around the world. Our members, including many of you who are here today, are museums, parks, historic sites, memorials, or memory initiatives that are all united by this common commitment that we need to use history and place to help our communities come to terms with the past and in order to build a more just and humane future moving forward. Our members are committed to these core principles, which include interpreting history through sight, engaging public in dialogue on pressing social issues, inviting the public to take action on those issues that are raised at their site, and working collectively to preserve memory, promote truth, and pursue justice. Members are committed to also sharing the practices and ideas and processes and their approach to this work. It's so much better when you're doing this work together and you're sharing what's working and what's not. So that we can really learn from each other as we're on this journey. So much of what I'm going to share with you all in this webinar today is thanks to members around the world who are working towards these goals. And if you're interested in joining the coalition, you can always reach out to us. And there's more information on our website as well about what it means to be a member of the coalition. And I'll put a link to that in the chat. So the purpose of today's webinar is to share some of the tools and stories and examples for how sites, museums, and historic sites can really reflect and start to identify communities that have been excluded in their work. We're going to do this by sharing what we've learned so far in a specific project that the coalition is working on and leading with members called Addressing the Silences. I'm going to share just a little bit more about that project before we dive in. This is a photo of a few of us who gathered in Austin when we kicked off this cohort. Addressing the Silences is a 3-year project, and the whole goal of this project is to really help these museums and historic sites create deeper and more meaningful relationships with their communities. This is a project that's funded through an amazing grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services that is really dedicated to this relationship building and transformation work. There are 13 museums that are part of this cohort in addressing the silences. All are members of the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience, and they range from sites all across the United States, so from Delaware to Michigan to California and Alaska. Some of these sites are large state-run institutions like the Illinois State Museum, and some are small volunteer-run organizations like the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society. So really a range of different organizations across the United States. But all of these sites are participating in this project because they're really dedicated to strengthening relationships with their communities and are committed to that deep, long-term repair work that's necessary to build that trust. So as a cohort, we've been working alongside one another. Everything that I share with you today is thanks to the members in that cohort. And we've been doing this through monthly gatherings to share the celebrations along the way, share what we're learning, share some of the challenges that have come up. And we're really excited to share those learnings with you all today. Each site that we work with in this Addressing the Silences cohort has also chosen a community to focus on, a community that may have been excluded in their work that they want to build deep and strong relationships with. So each of these sites is working with a community partner to strengthen those relationships. We have 13 incredible community partners that have joined us in this project, ranging from folks like the Sitka tribe of Alaska, to a veterans art organization, to a high school Spanish club, to a refugee coalition. And each site and partner is working together to build strong relationships, to make change at their site and in their community to really increase collaboration and inclusion in their region. We are in the middle of this 3-year process. We're right in the middle of this correction phase, and excited to share with you all where we've come so far. Much of what we share with you today is the very first stage of this process, so this planning and reflection work. In the next 2 webinars that we're going to have, we're going to share more about the correction phase, which is where we're at now, that's focused on relationship building and creating internal practice and policy change within the museum. We have a couple of partners who are on the call that are part of the cohort, some that are here to speak with us today and be a part of sharing some of the stories and lessons learned so far, and some who are just on the call participating, which is great to see you all. We have the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society that is joining us. Elizabeth and Anne are going to introduce themselves in a minute. And we had planned to have the Historical Museum at Fort Missoula joining us, but unfortunately they have had like hurricane force winds last night and the whole city of Missoula is without power. So Carolyn is safe and their team is safe, but they are unfortunately unable to join us. So we have Catoctin Furnace who's here today and a couple of partners on the call. I'll turn it over to Elizabeth and Anne if you all would like to introduce yourselves and just let me know when to go to the next slide.
Thank you, Stacy. Anne and I are thrilled to be here with you. And if you could forward to the first slide. So we are the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society. My name is Elizabeth Anderson Comer, and I'm very pleased to be the current president of the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society, which is a 52-year-old, as Stacy said, volunteer organization in Maryland.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anne Comer. I am a board member with the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society. This is an amazing project. I'm really glad to have been able to assist with it.
Next slide, Stacy, please. So for those of you around the world who may not yet be familiar with the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society, We are located in the state of Maryland. It's a very small state in the mid-Atlantic of the United States on the eastern seaboard. We are in Frederick County, which is considered central Maryland. And then within Frederick County, we're in a rural, very rural part, unincorporated area of the county called Catoctin Furnace. And interestingly enough, Catoctin Furnace was founded there because of the geology that exists. We are literally at the foot of the Appalachian range of the mountains. These are very, very old mountains, and the Catoctin Mountain is, the mountains really end literally outside the rear door of our Museum of the Ironworker. And because of that geology, close to the surface, iron, limestone were found, and then as well, water power off the mountain at a steady, good pace to create the power. And then, of course, a mountain of hardwood for charcoal, which was the fuel. But of course, those four components in the colonial times when Catoctin Furnace was founded meant nothing without the skilled labor of the enslaved Africans who were captured, brought to the United States, the colonies, against their will, and utilized or exploited for their skilled ironworking expertise, which was prevalent in all parts of Africa. So that's where we are, and that's why Catoctin Furnace is located where it is. Next slide, Stacy. So we are a late 18th to 19th century ironworker village, and I wanted to share with you our mission statement because I think it's a very important one to to recount, and that is our mission is to commemorate, study, and preserve the unique and rich history of this industrial iron village through the preservation of the architecture, the art and artistry, the cultural traditions, the cultural landscape, the lifeways and foodways of the diverse workers. And recently, we have added to that menu, if you will, the memory landscapes that we have been uncovering that tell us so much about the African, the enslaved Africans and free African Americans whose presence was on the landscape, but whose presence was obliterated, obfuscated within the 20th century. Next slide.
Oh, can we move to the next slide, please? Refrozen. I'm going to start talking. I'm not sure if we seem to be frozen. Oh, no.
Right, it's going to come back.
Okay.
Memory diff.
Okay.
Do we lose Elizabeth and Anne? Oh, you're back on, but muted. Hold on 1 minute while we work out some technical difficulties. Thank you all for your patience.
Can you hear us now?
Can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay.
All right, great. Thank you all. Oh, but you went back on mute.
Oh, okay, don't touch that.
All right, you're out now.
Okay. Where were we? Okay. Catoctin Furnace preserved European immigrant history, but lacked a collective memory that included the African American population.
And this is I'm glad Anne brought that point up, because this is really the most important part of the story of Catoctin. And one analogy that we can recount, which I think is very telling, Anne's too young to remember this, she wasn't born, but during the bicentennial, nearly 50 years ago, the prevailing narrative of Catoctin Furnace was that the iron that was used to make the shells used at the siege of Yorktown, the beautiful stoves and all of the implements, every nail, hinge, everything that Catoctin Furnace made was made by the European immigrant workers whose descendants still live in the village, and whose presence and contribution to the village from the mid-19th century on is very, very important and part of our message, part of our interpretive message at the furnace. However, what was excluded from that prevailing narrative in its entirety was the contribution of the enslaved Africans and African Americans, free African Americans, whose expertise really brought about the production and the wealth and prosperity of the owners. Next slide, please. And that is our addressing the silence. That is our silence to be addressed. So, as an example, we know so much about Thomas Johnson and his brothers, Joshua and London, Baker, Roger, Thomas, I just forgot the other brother's name, but anyway, Roger. They were very wealthy. They made an enormous amount of money at Catoctin, and they parlayed that money into power. Thomas Johnson became the first governor of Maryland. Louisa Johnson became First Lady. She married John Quincy Adams. And even today in Europe, Ursula von der Leyden is a descendant of John Bryn, who was one of our later owners of Catoctin. So as you can see, that that power and wealth continues right up to the current day. So we know a great deal about these individuals, but what we didn't know and what we're beginning to discover and share are the lives of the enslaved. For instance, one of the individuals who was found in the cemetery when a roadway was being built in 1979 and the cemetery was disturbed is an enslaved female, 20 to 25 years of age. That is the sum total, or was the sum total, of what we knew about her. So the juxtaposition of these two lives as examples is just paramount. Next slide, please. One of the things at the Museum of the Ironworker that we like to point out is that the village is ringed by mansions. And if you look at this map, you will see that up in the upper left, there are two mansions. In the lower right, another mansion. In the upper right, another mansion. And there's a new one that we just have discovered the site of. It no longer is extant in the lower left. So my point is that the wealth that was created by the labors of the enslaved Africans and free African Americans produced massive amounts of wealth for the owners. These mansions are 20 rooms, 18 rooms, 22 rooms. They're mansions in 2024, so dial back 2 centuries and, well, need I say more? They are truly monuments to the wealth that was made from the efforts of the enslaved and free African Americans. Thank you. We'll wait for you. We'll wait for our next section then, Stacy.
All right. Thanks so much, Anna and Elizabeth, for sharing more about your site as we kind of enter into this webinar. So again, we've got 3 series that are coming up. So today is this first part and reflection, but we have more to come and more to share with you all as well. So stay tuned. And our plan for what we hope to do with you all today with the rest of our time is to share some of the reflection frameworks and tools that we've developed with this cohort that Anne and Elizabeth have been part of, and many on a call have been part of. We're going to share some of those tools. And then Anne and Elizabeth and any other partners too that are on the call that are part of the cohort are welcome to share some of the specific stories and examples and the lessons learned from some of these tools that we've developed. After each section, we're going to ask you all to participate as well. So we're going to send you into some breakout rooms so you can get a taste of some of the reflection exercises that we've done with this cohort and get to know each other as well. So hope you anticipate that too. So the first part of our change-making process, and this is what we did at the very, very beginning of our cohort, was we developed an assessment tool for the sites to really reflect together on some of the current practices that they have. I'm going to share some of the assessment questions that we asked, and then we're going to ask Anne and Elizabeth and our other partners to share what lessons they've learned from this as well. We'll ask you all to reflect on a few of the questions in small groups. So the purpose of this front-end assessment was for each of the organizations that was participating in this cohort to really work together to reflect on the known gaps, needs, and assets of the institution, where they are right now, and begin thinking about whose stories, ideas, or values are excluded in the work that they're doing. This assessment was also for us to establish some benchmarks in measuring the impact of this overall project that we're doing. What I really want to emphasize here is that this was not by any means a grading tool. It was not super scientific. You don't get a score at the end. These are questions that were really designed to generate great conversations amongst your team to help people reflect openly and learn about each other's perspectives in terms of where you're at and where you want to go. There's 17 questions total in the assessment, and I'm going to put a link in the chat that you all can use to look at these questions as well, and feel free to share these with your organization too. I'll go over a few of the questions that were part of this assessment. So we started with really understanding and getting the museums to reflect on who they serve. Who are their intended participants, and then who actually visits the site that they have. So we ask questions such as, what geographic region do you serve and who lives there? Do you serve any communities that are outside of that geographic region, and to describe them and why? And to also really describe who is currently visiting your site. Who are those participants? And in these questions, we asked the museum to describe demographics in terms of describing who's visiting and who they serve, but also to describe consistent attributes or qualities or affinities or what these people care about in terms of who they serve. The next set of questions we asked was really around representation and in the context of each site's mission and the geographic region that they serve, to really reflect on the degree to which their partners, their staff, their board really reflect the communities that they intend to serve. So we had them discuss and write the level to which they agree representation is high or low. We then asked questions to really start to surface some of the site's exclusions and the things that they already knew about the communities that were highly included or excluded in their work. So we asked questions like, where has your organization demonstrated the prioritization of perspectives, values, and needs of people from marginalized or previously excluded communities? Which communities do you include in your mission but are absent in your collections, which are present and strong? And the same question, but reflecting on programs. Next, we wanted really all of the sites, and if you're using this tool, it's really helpful for you to do this as well, is to really think about the strengths and assets of your organization. What do you have that really is going to help in this change-making and relationship-building process? And to really name that and be able to specify that and lean into that as you're doing this change-making work. And then the next set of questions we asked was digging further into collaboration practices. So asking each of the sites, roughly the percentage of the programs that they're doing that is in collaboration with community members. But also thinking about and reflecting on the level of those community collaborations, the sense of power and agency that a community partner has within the organization. So are you collaborating with community partners in a kind of ad hoc way on specific programs or activities? Or are you inviting community members to weigh in on strategic decisions or influence wider decision making in your organization? We also asked about barriers. What are the barriers to this change-making work, to this collaboration, and to start to name some of those barriers and reflect on, for each site, what those barriers are. And then lastly, we asked about relevancy. So what are some of the important current issues, the current things that people in their region face and care about, and if or how the organization is starting to address those issues. And again, each of these questions and the set of questions is really meant to be a reflective tool. There's no right or wrong answer to this, but it's really to help this reflective conversation on where each organization was at. A few things that we learned with the 13 sites that participated in this were that most of the representation gaps that folks identified were actually in staffing, less so on the board, less so in program partners, but really pretty high gap in staffing. Most are prioritizing marginalized communities and programs, but we saw less prioritization in HR policies or collections practices. And then most are not creating the majority of their programming with collaborators. About 50% or less identified that they were working with collaborators to co-create programming. So we knew that we had some work to do there. Most identified community exclusions by demographics. So we knew we wanted to really expand and specify our definition of community and how we describe the communities we want to engage with. And then we had some low to medium levels of co-creation practices. So we knew there was an opportunity to expand how we share power and how we just share decision-making with community partners. And everyone identified tons of organizational strengths to lean into that we have been working with and utilizing throughout this process. We created this tool in collaboration with the Cura Collective. If you don't know of their work, they're absolutely amazing. They are helping us with evaluation around this project. But we also drew inspiration from so many different tools and assessments that are out there and wonderful to look at. So we have this list linked in that assessment document that I popped in the chat if you want to check out any of these resources, including ICSC's Correcting the Record project, which we drew a lot of inspiration from for this. But I wanted to ask Elizabeth and Anne, and if there's any other partners that are part of our cohort, if you all want to reflect on this too, you're welcome to raise your hand and share. But curious to hear, what did that front-end assessment, those set of questions, really help your team reflect on?
Okay, I'm now unmuted.
First slide.
First slide? This slide?
Yeah.
Or that? Yeah, okay, great. Sorry, we have many different technical things going on over here in order to be on the Zoom today. So, see, I'm so sorry. So with Catoctin Furnace, some of the hard looks that we had to look at internally is that when you go to Catoctin Furnace, it is predominantly white. The area is very white. Our board was extremely white, and even in the years in which I have been involved, and my grandmother was also a part of the Historical Society as well. My mother is a part of it. I started helping out when I was about 13 years old. Over to now, I've seen a lot of change with Catoctin Furnace, but with a predominantly white board, but also a board that is descended from the Hess laborers who come to Catoctin Furnace in about the 1830s, 1840s. They begin being paid laborers at Catoctin Furnace. We really had to take a hard look at the stories that the descendants of the Hess laborers were telling themselves, or it had been passed down as well, because like my mother mentioned earlier, with the Battle of Yorktown, the idea that had been prevailing for quite a long time, even oral histories that were taken back in the 70s, was that the different articles that were made at Catoctin were made by German immigrants, and that the stories of the enslaved and who was there were just completely obliterated from the memory landscape itself. We know that to be untrue, but also with the changes in the way that the museum tells the story now, it's a very important thing, but it also means there has been pushback for and pushback against the different stories that people tell themselves about their own families. And then with programming as well, we'll get to this in a moment, and my mom will discuss this, because I was actually unable to be at this event because I was in college at the time. But I did hear about programming where one of our springtime events, you know, it's very pretty. We sell flowers, all these different things. It's supposed to be a very positive event, but instead, we really pushed for the inclusion of talking about dark heritage as well. So there's a lot of change in the way in which we tell ourselves the stories of a place versus what actually happened. And in a lot of ways, this goes back to the importance of oral history, records, and memory landscapes.
Perfect. And yes, the assessment was a hard look, and it was such an important hard look that we needed that kick, frankly, to do. We did, in many ways, as Anne has pointed out, reflect the region and the community, but only by an accident, if you will, of history, that the descendants of the enslaved and free African Americans were forcibly removed from the area and moved from the area of their own accord in order to, we believe now and are finding evidence of, taking jobs in heavy industry, in the steel and ironworking community, and just getting out of this very rural area that was neither welcoming to them anymore in the 20th century, nor did it provide it didn't provide a social network, and it certainly didn't provide an economic network for them. So that population was absent, and as I said, we are understanding now more and more why that population was absent. And there were we made a critical analysis of the history and the past at Catoctin, which was absolutely essential. And we also saw the barriers that we had to this organizational transformation. We were, frankly, afraid, and some of our current, or then I should say, board members were very concerned for the physical safety of African Americans coming into the community and becoming part of it. So the assessment really made us sit down, focus, and answer these very difficult questions, because to some people it looked like we were having success. We were restoring buildings. We had a new museum that was opening. There was progress making, economic and other forms of progress in the community, but it was just a veneer. Next slide, Stacy, please. So we had to face the fact, and the assessment allowed us, or forced us to do this, to begin to use the phrase, which is apt, that the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society and the village of which it is named and it represents is a site of dark heritage, full stop. So the front-end assessment was very difficult for us. It was difficult for our board. It was difficult for our membership. It was difficult just all the way around. But it was so important. And we had to step back and we had to criticize the organization that we all loved. And as a volunteer, and with a volunteer board and volunteer, of course, membership, you know, people are volunteering their valuable time for something that they love. And it's very, very hard, as I said, to criticize that, to take a critical look at it and say, okay, fine, yes, we may be doing a good job with this, but we're not doing a good job with this. And we need to think about that and do the heavy lifting that this is going to take. Anne alluded to what I call a transformative moment. We had an event which had been going on for multiple years called Spring in the Village. Oh, you can picture it. Flowers, children's activities, you know, just games, some food, fun, you know, fun spring in the country kind of thing. So one of our members, an African-American woman, came to me and said, I would like to be a washerwoman on the front porch of the log house. I imagine this woman, my interpretive story for her is that she attempted to escape from Catoctin, and therefore, in the eyes of the owners, she's not to be trusted. And so I would like to portray her as a shackled washerwoman at Spring in the Village. So on my way driving to Pennsylvania to pick up the flowers for Spring in the Village from a wholesale place that we used, I had one board member and one member in the car with me, and we're driving through the countryside. And I said, you know, here's what, you know, our member has asked to do. Well, for the next multiple hours, what I had to, or what I listened to was, you can't do that. You absolutely can't do that. People are coming to this event to have fun. They're coming to buy their flowers. They're bringing their kids. It's Northern Frederick County. It's Catoctin Furnace. You cannot allow an African-American interpreter to be at this event in shackles. You can't do it. So I drove and I listened and I drove and I listened and I did it. Next slide, please. And this was a transformational moment at Catoctin. Some people walked right past her and looked away and didn't engage, but most people stopped, engaged, and I'll never forget this one young, probably less than 5, maybe 5 or 6-year-old young boy whose parents bent down and spent a long time speaking with him, explaining to him what was going on and why this was important. I wasn't intentionally overhearing, but it's a small site. And so I could hear this very important conversation between parent and child taking place. And that was a pivotal moment for us. And it did turn the tide. The board member and the member who were so concerned about this have never, that's all over. We are a site of dark heritage. We do interpret it. We don't ask African Americans to take on that role. That would not be in our place to do so. But when our interpreters ask us if they may, if they may do it, the answer is always yes. And this really did change Catoctin Furnace for the better. Thank you. Oh, wait, we do have one more slide, Anne.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm finding right now.
We're sort of, okay. So we realize that we must change, and we must tell the truth, and we must reflect, and we must allow that reflection and that criticism. So that is what we did.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth and Anne. I think, a lot of this, these exercises and this reflection tool is about, practicing some vulnerability and taking a hard look at what your organization has done and where the gaps, are. So it surfaced a lot for you all. I think it surfaced a lot for the other organizations that were part of this, and started to help you all think a little bit more about the different stories that you tell and how you tell those stories and who tells those stories. We want to give you all a chance to do some reflection with some of these questions in the assessment tool. So we're going to send you into some small groups, and we'd love for you to reflect on who visits your site and roughly what percentage of your programs are created in collaboration with community members. So we'd love for you all to share this and give you some time to reflect in small groups, and then we'll bring you all back to share. I'm going to open up the breakout rooms now, and I'll send this prompt in the chat as well for you all. And then we'll see you all in a bit. All right. Thanks, Elizabeth and Anne. I'm going to pause. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. There's never enough time in the breakout rooms, I know. But I hope you all had a chance to chat with each other and to get to know each other. We're going to do this 2 more times in this session, so you'll get a chance to talk with one another. We're going to keep us moving along and continuing to share some of the tools that we wanted to in this session with you. So after we had each site do some reflection around this assessment and answer some of these hard questions that required a lot of vulnerability, a lot of thought and discussion, we then asked each of the sites to get a little bit more specific in identifying the communities that were central to their work, but were really excluded in their work. There's so many communities that kind of surfaced from this exercise and thinking about who's included and who's not. And I think one of the hardest parts was like honing in and deciding, let's begin with one community and start to build relationships with this one specific community. So we're going to share some of the tools and exercises that we went through as a cohort to hone in on a community of focus. And then Elizabeth and Anne and any other partners on the call, you're welcome to share what was helpful to you as well. And we'll ask you all in the group to participate by doing a quick exercise around this. So in the chat, I'd love for you all to share one kind of community that you're part of, however you think of the word community. In the chat, just share one type of community that you're a part of. Yeah, carry a community of historic sites. Absolutely. See some others coming up in the chat. Crystal, I saw yours, but it just went to me, but it said a very diverse community of different cultures. Yeah, absolutely. Community of immigrants, surrounding immediate neighborhood, children in hospitals. Yeah, these are great. A Michigander, academic communities, absolutely. Yeah, all of these are different kinds of communities. But if you notice in the chat, we all described communities and the communities that we are part of in really, really different ways, right? So part of this work that we are doing in the cohort is to get even clearer on what we mean when we say the word community, right? When we think of communities as groups of people, right? We have to really remember that sometimes. Communities are people. And a community, when we think about it, is a group of people who share something in common, right? They have a common identity, a shared place of work. Some of that came up in the chat. A shared activity that they love or care about, an identity based on where they live. All of these forms are commonalities that can describe a community. But we know that people are really complex and we all have very different identities, different places, different shared activities that we love or care about. And so it's really, really helpful when we're thinking about engaging a community to really honor that complexity and that specificity. And when you're more specific about the communities that you want to engage, you're not only going to be more effective in engaging that community, but you're also going to really acknowledge that people are not just one of these things, but they're a combination of different things that they care about and are. In our cohort, we use this framework to kind of expand and specify our definition of communities that we wanted to engage with. When I worked with Nina Simon, when I was at the MA, we developed this kind of framing that just helped describe communities as a combination of both geography, identity, and affinity. So communities can be described by a location that they live in or a place that they feel connected to. So this could be a neighborhood, it could be a city, it could be a county or a description of a specific place. So for example, I can say that I live in Santa Cruz County, I live in a rural town, and I live in a mountain community. Communities can also be described by identity, and sometimes these identities are personally ascribed to us or they are socially constructed in our society. So, for example, I can say, I am vegetarian, I am white and Latina, I am an American. These are all different forms of identities. Communities can also be described by affinity. So, what people care about, what they like, or what they do. I like raising chickens. I care about social justice. I do printmaking. These are all things I like and care about, and there's communities associated with that. So when we describe communities, we try to use a combination of at least two of these descriptors. So we're not merely describing communities based on race or ethnicity, for example, or location or a specific hobby, but we're really describing communities in a way that acknowledges that people are complex and really honors that complexity. So, for example, maybe you want to engage a community that is in South County residents who maybe are Latinx, and that's how they choose to identify, and they really care about arts and culture, right? When you get more descriptive and holistic in how you describe communities, you're going to get more effective, and you're actually going to really honor the complex identities that we all hold. So we did this exercise for ourselves as well. It's one of the reasons why I asked you all to respond in the chat about the communities that you belong to, because so much of this work and reflection is not only reflecting on your organization and who you want to serve and who you want to engage with, but also reflecting on your own identity, your own positionality, and the levels of different power, privilege, or oppression that come along with that too. So we did this exercise for ourselves, but also for the communities we wanted to engage with. And then next, using this expanded and again, specific definition of communities, we asked sites to think about within the boundaries of their mission and their region, what are the specific communities that are highly included and highly excluded in their organization? So thinking about who you are as a staff, as a board, volunteers, who's highly included and excluded, again, with that descriptive term around community, and who you partner with, who your collaborators are, who your vendors are that you hire, who you partner on programming with, and then who you serve. So who are your visitors? Who are your program participants? So this really helps the organization understand who's represented and who is not in their work. But we know that inclusion is not just strictly about representation. Representation is a core part of this transformation, but it's also about sharing power and decision making. So we asked all the sites in this cohort to take it a step further by reflecting on whose stories, ideas, and voices are amplified in their work. So looking at their exhibitions, their communications, and their programming, whose voices are really present and whose are absent in their work. The next is around who decides. So some of the key decisions that are part of your organization around strategy, around budget, around programmatic decisions. Who is part of those decisions? Who has agency in those decisions, and who doesn't? And the last one is a little harder to reflect on. All of these are difficult to reflect on. But the last one is around who benefits. So who's really impacted by the work that you do? At the end of the day, which are the communities that are ultimately benefiting from the work that you're putting in? So we had each of these organizations really understand these questions, reflect on these questions to understand who have they been prioritizing in their work and who have they maybe not prioritized as much. Lastly, after all the sites did some of this deep reflection work, did the assessment, one of the hardest parts was you surfaced a lot of different communities that you wanted to engage with, right? Because we can't be everything to everyone. So it was really difficult to kind of hone in and specify one specific community they wanted to work with. There are many communities we can focus on, but again, we suggest really focusing on one first to expand that collaboration muscle. So we asked a bunch of questions to prompt some thinking around which community to prioritize in this project and think about working with. So we asked questions like, which of these communities are essential in telling a more full or honest history of your site or content? Which of these communities have been harmed at your site? Which relationships may be in the need of most repair? And which communities can you see a kind of longer term reciprocal relationship start to flourish, right? How can you think about this as a long-term relationship that you want to put some energy into? And probably the most important question we asked again and again is why this community? It's really, really important to get centered in your why and why this community is important to you. That's going to help your team get aligned about the importance of this partnership, but it's also going to let your partner know why you value them and why you want to work with them, and that there's a real purpose that is behind your desire to work with them. So Anne and Elizabeth, I'm curious to hear from you, if you can share with the group, what is your community of focus and what helped you decide on that community? There are a lot of communities that surfaced that you wanted to engage with, but ultimately for this project, you decided on one.
Thank you, Stacy. Our community of focus was the absent African-American iron workers and their descendants at Catoctin Furnace. This was a community that we knew existed, but that we did not have contact with, if you will. So we had to find that community, and one of the ways that we did that was through outreach, through our DNA study, through our oral histories, and frankly, through just luck in finding descendants whose familial memory included sort of buried, if you will, in under the surface, but whose, as it came forward, particularly using DNA and using our historical documents and really mining those historical documents, we were able to begin to create that community. Finding them then and engaging with them is an ongoing process. But the most important part of that was creating a truly, and we hope we've succeeded at that, a welcoming and inclusive community. In other words, making it clear that we, that is the community that we want the community of the descendants of the enslaved Africans and free African Americans to be co-stewards of the site, and certainly the driving force behind their own story and their own wishes, desires, and their narrative to be told. Finding a person who was a leader in the community was essential, and one of those is the main leader is on this Zoom today. We're very happy to say the descendant of Robert Patterson, who I call the man. He was an amazing gentleman at Catoctin Furnace, a collier, an ironworker, a pig farmer. He bought 25 acres. He started a school for African American children up on the mountain, and a hill called Bob's Hill is named for him. And that story really had been obfuscated, and it is not anymore. There's even a wayside for Bob's Hill. There are hikes up Bob's Hill, and Robert Patterson is very much a person that everyone who comes to Catoctin Furnace hears about. Next slide, please. So one of the keys, of course, was engaging youth, and Anne also has a story to tell about that.
Yes. So during the Thanks, Mom. All right. During the pandemic, we have a program that actually replaced Spring in the Village fully, called the Maryland Iron Festival, which is a weekend-long educational program, but also fun. There's music, there's food, there's also the museum is open, there's interpretation of the site. But during the pandemic, of course, everything stalled, so we switched to doing the virtual Maryland Iron Festival. And in this case, for one of the programs, I worked with the students at Silver Oak Academy in their culinary arts program, and they created a video and sent it to me with information about foodways, especially in the African American community. And they had selected a recipe that they wanted to present. But within this video, we were able to also include that one of the students kind of went off script, I think, in a very wonderful way, because he ended up explaining his own connection to the dish that was being presented. They had all collectively decided on which dish it would be, but he started talking about his grandfather gardening and planting this and how it was prepared in his household as well. And it was a really a wonderful moment to then have a continuation of oral foodways and tradition to be happening in real time, because so much of these stories is passed down through oral tradition. So it's extremely important that we continue to encourage and to create resources for oral history, so that not only the stories of where a family lives or where a group lives it still exists and is in the cultural memory, but also is included in foodways as well, because so much of our stories are through food.
Mm-hmm. Next slide, Stacy. That was a great example. So another thing that we do at Catoctin is we have a Heritage at Work program where students learn historic preservation building trades and thus help restore structures. And so we say that we're changing and preserving and enhancing young lives while restoring historic buildings. And that, I believe, is our last slide for this section. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anna and Elizabeth, and Crystal's on the call too, which you've been a key partner in this project. So Crystal, if there's anything you want to add to it, you're welcome to.
I don't have anything to add except that I work with two really great people and I love that.
No, that's great.
There's
Wonderful to hear.
others too, but you know, these two I love working with.
You'll have a great team. All right, we're going to give you all a few minutes again in small groups to try just a taste of these exercises that we've done. So our prompt for you all is to think about the communities in that geography, identity, affinity framework, and to think about who is highly included or excluded in terms of who your organization partners with. Just going to give you a few minutes in breakout rooms to do that. We'll bring you back, and then we have one more tool to share before we close. So you should get an invitation to join a breakout room now. And I hope you had some good time to connect one-on-one with each other. It's nice sometimes when we have a small group, we're able to dive a little bit deeper together. All right, we're going to share the last set of tools with you all, and then we'll save some time for questions from anybody in the audience. So once we had all of our cohort members in addressing the silences really identify a specific community, we then asked them to start thinking about potential partners they could work with that were from that community of focus to start to build a relationship with for this project. And sometimes identifying a community partner is like super difficult, especially when you don't have a connection to that community, right? So in this section, I'm going to share just a few questions and tips that we shared with sites to help hone in around that. And then a few tips that we came up with together with the sites that were in this group around that first outreach and how to approach that. So I'm going to share that. And then again, a few examples, and I'll ask you all a question at the end. An important step, I think, before starting to think about your community partner is to really think about what connects you to that community of focus. What is that credible link to what they like or do or care about and what you have to offer? So you want to make sure that that collaboration ask that you're making is not too far of a stretch, right? You're not trying to get like a football player to come to an art museum, right? You're really thinking about what do you have to offer? What does this community have to offer that you both have in common? When you get clear on this, it's going to help you really understand the kinds of partners that you might want to work with, but it's also going to form a stronger connection with your community partner. So really thinking about what you each care about. One exercise we did with the sites is a little bit of mind mapping. This is just a simple visual representation of ideas and how they're connected to each other. So we asked each of the sites to think about like who they know in their community that they may already be connected with, maybe through family or friends or other staff that are at the organization, maybe even past collaborators or leaders that are in the community. And mapping this out kind of helps you see where potential partners may be, or what kind of learning you may need to do to learn more about the different kind of partners that may be available, right? So some of our sites ended up working with partners that they already had some kind of connection with. Maybe they were working with them on a specific program like Juneteenth or Dia de los Muertos, or maybe they just wanted to really deepen that connection and broaden that partnership. There are other sites that just didn't have a lot of connections with their community of focus. So we invited them to really do some research to ask some of the partners that are connected to this community who they would recommend that they talk to. And that was their way of really identifying and thinking about who could be a potential partner to work with. There's not like a right or wrong way to go about this, but mapping this out together is going to help you kind of surface some surprise connections that you may not be aware of that exist on your team. Once you've identified a community partner or a couple community partners to work with, or that you want to reach out to, our cohort came up with some tips for that first invite, some ways to kind of go about approaching that invitation with a lot of care and a lot of intention. We suggest really communicating in a way that's best for them. Sometimes sending an email to invite a partner to collaborate is like not the best approach. So you may want to give them a call or show up in person at one of their events. But thinking about what might be the best way to open up this conversation. We also suggest sharing something that you already appreciate about them. That shows this partner that like you did your homework. You already know some of the things that are really, really wonderful about them. And then share something that you both care about and why you're excited to explore that and collaborating. So again, that common thread that you all have. We think that you care about X and we do too. We'd like to explore what that could look like. And then choose a location and a time that's best for them. Really leave it to your partner to share the spaces and the places and the time that is going to work best for them. And say it simply and clearly, right? You don't want to send an email with a really long letter about how your organization has done really harmful things in the past and go on and on about that. You just want to open up an invitation for you to start this repair, start this conversation. And then the next thing that we had was just sharing some tips for that first chat with your partner. I'll send you these slides and I'm not going to go over all of these tips, but these are some of the tips that we came up with. And a few that I want to kind of call out here is really the second one of starting to get to know each other as humans before you start to understand each other's organizations. Really get to know that person that represents the organization or the community group or that club that you are working with. The next one I just want to call out is practicing some humility, right? In this first chat, you may hear some of the experiences of the harm your organization has caused or some things that just didn't go well in the past. And you may not be responsible for that, but you're going to need to listen to that and really be open to hearing some feedback. Lean into kind of what you both care about and really let that drive the conversation because that's going to be the glue that holds your partnership forward. So really exploring that is helpful. And then the last one I want to call out here is just, it's okay if that partner is like, this is not the right time. I've got too much going on and like, we need to talk at another time, or this is not the right project for us. Just be okay with that and flexible with that and always ask for their recommendations of who else you might be able to reach out to and connect with. And maybe this is not the right time for collaborating with them. And maybe in the future, this has opened up a window for that. So these are some of the things that we developed with the cohort, and curious to hear from Elizabeth and Anne, when you started to first reach out and meet with your community partner, what was difficult and what was surprising about that outreach? And if you have any lessons to learn or stories to share around that.
Yes, thank you, Stacy. First slide. We had some challenges because the Catoctin Furnace area was known within the African American community as a sundown town. So how to counteract that, how to help people feel comfortable for their safety and for mentally as well as physically. We had to acknowledge it. We couldn't obfuscate it. And we had to be active listeners. We had to acknowledge, difficult though it is, we had to acknowledge this. We had to give it the full attention that it deserved. And we had to apologize within our invitation. Yes, wrong, but let's see where we can go forward. Next slide, please. And so we, our partner is the descendant community of enslaved iron workers identified through collective kinship. That's everyone, every African American in the United States. It's your legacy of skilled ironworking that made the United States what it is today. Full stop. collateral kinship, and in some cases direct kinship, but all equal kinship, all equal. Physically absent in the community, the descendants are now both present and engaged. And our transformational change is co-stewardship of the site with the African American community, manifests through board membership and board management of the African American Cemetery. And we have made great strides. Our board includes now 3 African American members out of the 7, and we are just very, very happy with the progress. It's a work in progress. We're not finished. We have a lot to do yet, but we're happy and pleased with what we've done thus far. And our final slide is a Zoom chat, a Zoom descendant group meeting showing some of our wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I wake up most mornings to a Facebook chat that says, "Good morning, cousins," because that's the way the community, they found their cousins, and we're so thrilled with that. So we're finished. We're so thrilled to have shared this with you. Thank you, Stacy, and everyone on the call.
Thanks, Anna and Elizabeth, and thanks to everybody who's on the call. We just have a little bit of time left, and we have a lot of partners here who are part of this cohort too. So if you all either want to add any comments or reflections, or if there's any questions from anybody in the group, now is the time. We're happy to answer them.
I just have a comment. I just want to thank
Yeah.
Anne and Elizabeth for giving me the opportunity to tell my family story.
Thanks, Crystal. Jose, good to see you.
Yeah, thank you, Stacy. Very, very happy to be with you. And thank you so much, Elizabeth and Anne, for this amazing, incredible work that they have developed with you. Just one brief reflection, that is how hard it is sometimes to combine the way that the museum is working in terms of this scarcity mentality, the resources, the time, the money, and make it compatible with the needs when you work with this community approach, because you need time, you need to build trust relationships. This is not automatic, this is not mechanic, as Elizabeth and Anne and you have perfectly shown. That deserves a lot of care, time, a lot of intention, and this is not something that you can get in 3 weeks. But the museums sometimes are so forced and pressure to get some results, immediate results, and demonstrate to the board or to whatever that is working. And these 2 kind of universe worlds are so challenging to connect and to make compatible. And I know so many professionals that they love to work from this community approach, but the system is very well designed to push them in another completely different direction. Just to share with you that this even demonstrates how precious and relevant and challenging and important is the work that you are doing inside all these conditions and all these limits that every day, I'm sure, pushing you in a different direction that the community approach. So thank you so much for sharing this wonderful work.
Thanks, Jose, and such an important insight. And I see a lot of our partners nodding on the call. I think it's one of the reasons why we're so lucky that this was a 3-year process, right? We spent about 5 months in this reflection phase before we even started to reach out to a community partner. And oftentimes we're not granted that kind of flexibility or that amount of time to reflect. So yeah, it was a true gift to work from a abundancy mindset instead of a scarcity mindset, as you so well put. I want to share one more thing, and then Elizabeth, Ann, and I will stick around for a few more minutes for questions. But we, again, are going to do this on August 8th as our next webinar. So I put a link in the chat here if you would like to register for that. We're going to have other community partners that have been part of this cohort and museum partners that are part of this cohort on that call to share some stories. And this is about the second step of like, okay, you've got a community partner. Now, like, how are you going to build a relationship that's reciprocal, that is full of trust and care, as Jose pointed out? So we're going to share some stories and lessons learned from that as well, and hope you guys join us. And just want to say thank you so much for everybody who is on the call, and Elizabeth and Anne for sharing some of this and really unpacking. It's a difficult process to do this reflection. So thank you for your vulnerability and your wisdom and insight to share to help others grow in this process. And we're going to stop the recording, but again, you're welcome to stick around if you have more questions, and welcome to pop off, and hope to see you next time. Thank you.